So my first question is for you, Hanif. Having straddled both the novel and screenplays for close to 30 years now, what are the dangers you think of being too faithful to the source material when authors adapt their own works for screenplays?
Well, I don't adapt my own stuff.
Okay.
I write original screenplays. It's much easier to write an original screenplay than to do an adaptation, actually. When you're doing an adaptation, you spend all your time trying to squash something into something else. And so when you're doing an adaptation, you spend most of your time cutting stuff out. When you're doing an original script, as I say, I find it much easier. You can do what you like. You're completely free. You don't have to try and pretend to follow the arc or style of somebody else's story. But I've recently done an adaptation of a novel, of a British novel published in 1959 called To Serve With Love. And I did it because it's a story I love. It's about a black teacher in the East End. And what you do is, when you start, you realize that the book is unadaptable because there are big holes in it that you can get away with in a novel that you can't get away with in a movie. So you've got a big gap between there and there. So you have to make up stuff, and you have to write in the style of the author, which is very difficult. You also have to take a lot of material out. It seems to me that the main rule, the only rule that I would advise anybody to follow if they're doing an adaptation, is that the movie has to work entirely on its own terms. It has to work on its own terms as if nobody has actually read the book first.
Right.
I recently saw a movie. It was so terrible an adaptation. It was a film called Gone Girl.
Yeah. We all love the book and the movie
It's
didn't
really
quite
dreadful.
work.
And I was lucky enough not to read the book. And I was unfortunate enough to see the film. And when I saw the film, I kept thinking, they've just tried to do the book. I can't make head nor tail of it. They must have thought they've done the book, but watching it, I couldn't understand any of it at all. It may be to do with the misfortune of my not being able to understand anything, or it may be because it's a terrible adaptation. But I thought the one rule has to be that you've got to understand the film if you haven't read the book. But on the whole, I would recommend not doing adaptations, and I find the whole business of adaptation really depressing, actually. Because in Hollywood, they only want to buy books that have been successful and make them into films. And you think, well, why don't you just commission original screenplays, actually? Just start again. Go to a writer and say, look, write us a movie. When I wrote My Beautiful Laundrette, I wrote it directly as a movie. It couldn't have been a short story. It couldn't have been a novel. It was a movie. It was always made to be a movie, and it was the better for not being adapted from another form.
Right. Paul, you were involved in adapting your first book into a movie, and then I believe for the 3 others, you only had a story credit. So did you have a terrible experience with the first one? What made you step back from the others?
I didn't have a terrible experience. Can you hear me all right? Can you hear me? No, you can't hear me. Now, can you hear me? How's this? Better. Shall I simply detach this and speak in this manner? The question was, did I have a terrible experience? First, whenever you write a book and someone comes forth and says, we want to make your book into a film, you are happy. You are very, very happy. Because you realize that even if it's a bad film, the book's profile will be raised and more people will read your book. You'll also make a little more money. So films are always a good thing, although I agree with Hanif that I saw Gone Girl, and that was the most implausible, it was a ridiculous, in terms of motivation, plot, they were obviously following the book, which I didn't read, and I couldn't make head or tail of it.
Oh, good.
And it also, at the end, he sort of hooked up with this awful woman again, and you thought, what the hell?
Well, it's much more compelling in the book,
They
though.
do like to do that, Paul, sometimes.
So the first book, I wrote a book, the one that Anindita might be referring to is Saint Jack.
Yeah.
It's a film that was made by Peter Bogdanovich, who had a great reputation in the 1970s. The book came out in the early 70s. The film was made about 76 or 77. I wrote half the script. It was enjoyable working together. I must say, this is called Adaptations, but it's also, the making of a film is a group effort. You write the film, you're involved with the director, the producer, not with actors, but you're involved with a group of people. If you've written the book, you've spent a year or two not seeing anyone. Something with a film, you're talking to people. People are talking to you. They're buying you lunch. They might be saying rewrite it or do something, but actually it's a very collegial, on the whole, not always happy, but it's a social effort that doesn't exist in the writing of a book. Writing of a book, you might have something to do with the editor, but if not that person, then you're on your own. With a film involves a large group of people who want to find potential viewers for the film. They want to do the best possible job. I can't think of an adaptation of a book into a film in which the film is better than the book. Passage
Oh,
to
I
India.
can. What about The Godfather?
That's a good example. Or Jurassic Park.
The Godfather, what Hanif said is true, The Godfather. But The Godfather is a great film, but Godfather 2, which is not based on a book, is it?
It's based
It
on
does. I think it does have elements of the Puzo book in
Okay,
Godfather
all right,
2.
I take it back. So with The Godfather accepted, any others? I can't think of it. But The Godfather was...
I would say Solaris, the original Russian version, because I love the book, but I think the film is better than the book. But it's really hard to think of.
But when you think of all right, maybe I'll modify that by saying a great book. The Godfather by Mario Puzo is a good book, but the film is a great film. It's operatic. It has everything. It's one of the great films. But a film was made of the Alexandria Quartet. A film was made of Albert Camus' The Outsider, The Stranger, Passage to India. Think of the great book, War and Peace, Anna Karenina. They're all second-rate.
The Great Gatsby.
Huh?
The Great Gatsby.
Great Gatsby. Most of them are unfilmable. And I agree with Hanif that the ideal thing is for a director or producer to say, write me a film. You have an idea. And the film will be something whole. It will have a beginning, middle, and end, maybe not in that order, but it'll be something. And my experience with St. Jack was the film. St. Jack, the Peter Bogdanovich film, was the first one that I wrote a script for, stands in my mind because it was filmed in Singapore, and when a film is made on location, it has something very important. You actually you see real people, real scenes. So although the film is negligible, I think the scenes of Singapore are authentic and of a city that doesn't exist anymore. Other films that I was involved with, they were all more or less happy experiences because I began to understand that a film and a book are two different things, that you can't film a book, it has to become something on its own. An interesting thing happened with the adaptation of The Mosquito Coast. The first script was written by a man called Paul Schrader. He wrote Taxi Driver and Raging Bull and lots of other films. Great guy. He wrote the script. It was very faithful to the book. And the director, Peter Weir, said, this is too faithful to the book. He said the script doesn't work. So he wrote the script. But I said, I wrote the dialogue and some of the voiceovers. Peter Weir wrote the script. And I said, are you going to get a credit? He said, no, because of the union rules, Paul Schrader will be credited with writing the script. So the script of The Mosquito Coast was not written by Paul Schrader. It was written, the film that you see of The Mosquito Coast was written by the director, Peter Weir. An interesting thing happened in the course of that. He saw something in the book that I didn't see. He saw I thought the book was about one person, the father in the book. He saw that the father needed someone to play against. And he saw that there's a missionary in the book the Reverend Spellgood. He said, he didn't actually tell me, but he saw that this is really two stories. I always saw it, when I wrote the book, it's one story. A boy talking about his father going to the Mosquito Coast and succeeding for a while and then failing. Peter Weir said, or didn't say, but when he wrote the script, I saw he drew a plot line out. He amplified a plot line that I hadn't seen. And had I written the script to the book as an original script or an adaptation, I wouldn't have seen that myself. It took him, Peter Weir, to find that secondary character and raise him to a kind of importance. I'll say one thing more about Paul Schrader, who I think is a great scriptwriter. In Raging Bull, have you seen Raging Bull? Do you know it's a story of Jake LaMotta. It's an absolutely great movie. I said, this is the story of Jake LaMotta, the boxer. I said, there's a wonderful character played by Joe Pesci. I said, what was the relationship between Jake LaMotta and the Joe Pesci character? He said he didn't exist. He said, I invented this character as a way of showing Jake LaMotta. So he just came out of nowhere. He read the book, invented a character for the book, and then the film worked because he turned it upside down and added characters to it. So I think the ideal thing is what Hanif said, an original script, that being faithful to a book inevitably ends in failure. I mean, I don't see how you can't film a book. There's too much to the book. V.S. Naipaul was here yesterday. A film was made of The Mystic Marceur by Merchant Ivory, I believe.
Yeah, I never saw it.
It was not a success. It was not a success. But you can compare the book, maybe rent or get The Mystic Marceur, read the book, you'll see it's two different things. Anyway, this is an interesting topic, but it's a tangled one.
Let's take a minute to talk about Midnight's Children. How many of you have seen the movie and what do you think about it? Midnight's Children?
I haven't seen it. I've read and loved the book, but I haven't seen the movie.
I've never seen the film, partly because I love the book so much.
Okay, good idea. Sarah, you've spoken
I was
about...
going to say, it does strike me as one of those unfilmable novels. I think some novels, because they're so literary, the effects they're producing are produced... Sorry. I was going to say, some novels are so literary, so intensely literary, that they're not just telling a story or painting a picture there. The excitement of them resides in the way the language is used. I think that's true of Dickens, although Dickens does lend himself to adaptation because he does tell a good story. Or a novel like Orlando, for example, which I think that there has been that film version, which was rather special. But I think some novels you just should leave alone, really. Why not just leave them alone? Anyway.
Yeah. I think Midnight's Children is perhaps the best example of a recent adaptation gone horribly wrong.
Which is what?
Midnight's Children is a good example of something gone wrong. Sarah, you've spoken about the... sorry.
It's really... I mean, when I think of adaptation, everything that you've all said is really true. I mean, you know, why do a great book? You're not going to adapt it into a film. And I think even as a play, you're not going to achieve what you can on the page. But I'm a frustrated filmmaker. I think my real dream would have been to be a filmmaker. And I think I can understand the passion of someone getting a response from a book and wanting to try and translate it into their medium, into the work they do. So that's why, Paul, I was trying to think of exceptions today for this panel, kind of the possibility of being able to translate something about your love of a work into another medium. I think when that's done, the only other example I could think of off the top of my head was Visconti's The Leopard, as a great book that something about the film medium, and I think Visconti had length and had a canvas that translated the book. It's not the same thing, but I think it's a great work of art. So there you have two works that are great works of art.
Yeah, I mean, I can't think of a film, but there was a very well-received stage version of Nicholas Nickleby by the RSC in the UK in the late 80s. I remember seeing a televised version of it on the new Channel 4 when I was about 17. And it was fantastic, and I think the reason it worked was because it could get out of the medium of stage some of the things that authors can get out of the medium of language, which is the invention and the flamboyance. You know, I sometimes, the screen is, ironically, because you can have these wonderful cinematic vistas, the screen is also a rather limited medium, I think, whereas stage, I think, in some ways has more in common with literature than the screen does.
Well, Dickens loved the theatre.
Dickens loved the theatre, exactly, yeah.
Sarah, you've spoken about the importance of letting go when you hand over your book for adaptation. You've said in an interview earlier, it doesn't change the book, it's just this extra thing that is closely related to mine, but it's someone else's project. So tell me a little about this Zen-like stance. Aren't authors inherently possessive about their works? How do you let go?
Well, actually, I've slightly revised that since I had my last adaptation, which was, in some ways, it was a frustrating one. It was The Night Watch, which is a novel of mine set in the 1940s in London during and just after the Second World War. And it was adapted by the BBC a few years ago. And it's frustrating because in some ways it's what I would think of as the strongest of the adaptations. It's got some wonderful performances in it. And it kind of looks all right at times, but it's an hour and a half, and it compresses what's quite a long leisurely novel into sort of 90 minutes, and it's to me it felt like it kicked the guts out of the novel, and so after that I felt, I'd always prided myself on not being too precious about my books, that I was always completely happy to let somebody else take care of them, and after that I kind of thought, well, maybe I should have been a bit more precious about The Night Watch, really. But, I mean, I agree with Paul, I think, said it, that adaptations, they earn you a bit more money, which as a writer is always welcome, and they bring you new readers. They give new life to a book that's perhaps a few years old. And I mean, I often meet readers who have come to read my books because they saw them first adapted on TV. So they're a mixed experience for authors, I think. But they do, I think for me, I do retain that idea that they're not tampering with the novel. The novel will always be there as I wrote it. They're just this other kind of slightly non-identical twin in the world. That's very much somebody else's project, and not mine. Do you feel like that?
But a script is also not a literary exercise. A script is it needs to be visualized. If you know the work of William Faulkner, you know William Faulkner. So William Faulkner wrote The Sound and the Fury, Sanctuary, Town, Intruder in the Dust. He wrote some of the most complex prose. There's a 6,000-word sentence in Requiem for a Nun, the Faulkner novel, Requiem for a Nun, a 6,000-word sentence. But Faulkner, who wrote these highly structured novels, and invented words, and invented a whole way, different ways of telling a story through the eyes of a man who is completely out of it, an idiot. It's The Sound and the Fury. Also wrote scripts. He wrote, after he won the Nobel Prize for Literature, he wrote Land of the Pharaohs. He wrote God is My Co-Pilot. He wrote To Have and Have Not. If you look at a Faulkner script that he wrote in Oxford, Mississippi, you'll see it's a script. It has dialogue, but it has camera angles. If you look at his novels, you'll see it looks like something that was written by a completely different person. It's as though he was using two sides of his brain. As a novelist, no one ever told him to change a semicolon. As a scriptwriter, he must have gone to innumerable script conferences and said, tighten up the middle, we need more dialogue here, we have a scene for Humphrey Bogart, what should he do here? And you can see that the complex relationship that he would have had with his writing, on the one hand as a scriptwriter, on the other hand as a novelist. And I think that's the schizophrenia, that's the paradox of this business, that when you're writing a script, it's not a literary exercise, it's not fine writing. Dialogue, of course, is important, but what you need to do is somehow imagine what the director will do with it. And you see it in a sort of dim way, or maybe you discuss it with the director and you write it, and you do the best you can. But ultimately, it's up to the photographer, the director, and the actors to turn it into something that is detailed and textured. Do you agree with me?
Yeah, I mean, I remember when I had my first book, Tipping the Velvet, adapted, I remember walking into the actors' read-through, and there were all the sort of technicians there as well, makeup people and costume people, and it was extraordinary to see it, because, of course, as a novelist, you're in charge of all those things. You're in charge of designing the costumes for your characters and combing their hair and things like that. You're in charge of the weather, you're in charge of the lighting. But with an adaptation, those things all have their own departments kind of taking care of them. It's this extraordinary kind of industry of people. So it is a complete, you just have to get your head in a completely different place, don't you, I think?
For that reason, it's probably wrong for the writer of the novel or the story to write the script, because it's very hard for that person, for he or she to have the objectivity to turn it into something else. A stranger would probably do a better job. I also think that a lot of great films came from very short pieces, a sketch or a short story. I mean, there's a wonderful film by Nick Rogue called Don't Look Now. It's based on a short story by Daphne du Maurier. It's very, you know, it might be 10 pages at the most as a story. So that allows the writer or the director to expand it, to make it into something else.
Right. Paul, do you think there's a specific kind of novel that lends better to adaptations, period pieces, historical books? Is there a kind of book that you think lends better to be translated?
I don't know. Maybe something with you mean a costume drama or a story? No, I only think. I think it's entirely up to, as I said. There are great novels. People say, this is a great novel, it will make a great film. But that's not, that actually hasn't proven to be the case. The great novels don't become great films. They become opportunities. There are probably 5 different Anna Kareninas. None of them is equal to the book, none. And then a simple book like the Camus book, as I said earlier, it seems like a simple book, but the film really wasn't much at all. So I don't know whether there's a particular kind of book. I think it's one that where you have the screenwriter has the greatest latitude, probably, to turn it into something.
Christos, what's your view?
I'm going to be completely, a little way selfish in terms of my experience with adaptation, is that, just like you said at the beginning, Hanif, I was never interested in adapting my own work.
Right.
I thought I had worked on this novel, I had done the work, I didn't want to go back there. I think there's an element, I think I've been very, very fortunate with the adaptations that have come from my work. I didn't know going in it what would emerge, except that I knew something about the previous work of the filmmakers. One work wasn't successful, not based on a novel, based on a play. The previous work of the filmmaker I admired and respected, so that's not a golden rule. What's been fantastic for me about, as a writer, as a novelist, as a writer of adaptation, is the collaboration, and not necessarily the collaboration on the individual the project. I've enjoyed meeting the writers, directors, the art directors on The Slap, on Dead Europe, on the first head on the first film that was made from a book of mine. But it was the working relationships that began through that period of adaptation that have been most important. So there's people I've met through that working, through them choosing to do my work, that I've continued to work with in theatre, I've continued to work with in other forms of collaboration. That, I think, is the best thing as a writer. And Sarah, you were talking about actors. Like, the working in theatre, which I thought I would never do. Theatre was never part of my life, kind of upbringing. It just, it wasn't a medium that was there in my world. So being invited to come into theatre, and the only reason I got invited was when my first book was adapted into a film, the scriptwriter, who's called Andrew Bavell of that film, said, "Why don't you come and get involved in a theatre group that in Melbourne?" I thought I would never be someone who would write theatre. I still don't think I'm a natural theatre writer, but working with actors was revolutionary for me, revelationary rather, kind of in terms of what it gave my next book. Like, because I hadn't trained as an actor, seeing how actors performed, how they worked, how they got into their craft, taught me something about how to develop a character. That's been the best part of adaptation for me.
That's fascinating for me. I, like you, I got involved with a theatre project last year, having thought I was not the sort of writer who did that sort of thing. And I absolutely adored it, and I loved the collaborative side of it. And again, I never thought I would enjoy collaboration. I loved working with technicians and with actors, but I'm not sure what I have learnt from it that I would now take to a novel. So it's very interesting to hear you say that. But I would say that, weirdly, having seen scripts based on my novels, I found that very, very educative as a writer, because it absolutely cuts to the heart of the story, and each scene really earns its place in the script. They have to get to the nub of a scene. The cast of characters is often relatively limited, and that I remember after seeing the first. You write a novel and it's maybe 400 pages, and a script is about 100 pages, and it's very bare, big margins on the page. But it really made me think about, with the next novel, what is this scene really about? What am I trying? What should be foregrounded here? That was great. Did you find that with yours?
Yes, I did. Sorry, Sarah, as you were talking, I was thinking of something else about
That's all right.
adaptation. About the novel. As I said, I feel like I'm a frustrated filmmaker, and I don't know whether this idea would be a novel or a script. I can imagine it as both, but what you can choose from a novel that you love. I've thought about this for years. I don't know if it, but something like Ian Forster's Morris, right? Which I've come back to in my life again and again, and I've always been fascinated about the story of Morris, bourgeois, gay man, early 20th century English. The novel ends with him escaping to some nirvana, with Scudder, a working class gay, man who works on the estate. And I've always thought I'd like to do Scudder's story, and take it to Australia as a possible place where he went. I think that's a possible way you can adapt a novel you love. That's a great novel in a way that releases you to do your own work.
Just steering the conversation slightly, Hanif, what kind of complexity do you think one can lose when they're adapting a book for the screen in terms of character backgrounds or nuance, and what does the visual medium add that a book can't sort of convey?
Well, a movie is a visual form. You're looking at it. And what you're basically looking at, you're looking at the actors. And basically what you're doing is writing a set of instructions to the director. It's like if somebody says to you, how do I get from here to there? You go, well, you go up there and you go around there and you go over there. You're just telling them, as Paul says, it's not literature. You're just giving instructions, and you're saying, if you go from there to there like that, you've got a chance of having a movie, right? But actually what the audience are looking at are the performances. And so you're writing spaces for the actors to act in. Some of the most beautiful scenes in the movies that I've written are not really written at all. They're just like half a page of dialogue, and they're not really they're saying fuck all, actually, if you look at it. But then you've got Peter O'Toole or Vanessa Redgrave or Daniel Day-Lewis saying the lines. It really looks good when they say them, So what you want to do is really write rather banal dialogue and really hope you've got good actors saying it. Then it looks really great.
Hanif, can I ask...
it's not a piece of writing a script, actually. It's really, if you're lucky, you write a script and you give it to other people and they make it much better, if you're lucky. And if you're unlucky, they'll fuck it up. But whichever way it goes, you get paid.
Hanif, sorry, I just wanted to ask you, so do ideas come to you as film? And does ideas come to you as novels?
Yes, I wondered that.
Well, I start looking for a movie when I have to pay the school fees for my kids. I mean, I like to write short stories. I like to write essays, and after a bit, I think I really need a job, and I really like to do a movie. And when I'm writing a movie, I will see it. And I'll see the spaces, and I'll see the actor walking around here and there. Then you see a bit of dialogue and so on. But you see it visually. When I'm writing a novel, I don't know about you, but I see the words on the page. I see the page, I see the description, I see the dialogue. So I would see a novel visually, but I would see it differently to the way I see a movie. And you imagine really good actors. You know, when you're writing a movie, you imagine really good actors saying the dialogue, making it look good, and doing stuff in between the talking. But you do conceive of it completely differently, yeah.
Just in terms of what the screen can bring to a novel, there is an intensity to a film, a good film, that of course we all want our we all want our readers to have intense experiences when they're reading our novels. But there's something so compressed about the narrative experience of a film, and there's so much. It's got so much on its side in terms of size, scale, noise, that kind of thing, which I think can work for and against an author. I remember seeing a couple of years ago, I saw a lecture by Hossein Amini, the scriptwriter, who years and years ago did Jude the Obscure. There was a very good adaptation of that with Christopher Ecclestone. And he said, Jude the Obscure is one of the bleakest books in the language, isn't it? And he said he went to the first screening and watched the audience come out, and they just looked kind of appalled and stricken. And he realized in that moment that asking an audience to stay with a bleak film is very different from asking a reader to stay with a bleak book, because after all, people can close a book, they can walk away, they can go to the loo, they can have a cup of tea. But with an audience in a cinema, they're kind of trapped, and they have to undergo this experience, which I think is an amazing thing, but it's a lot to ask of an audience. I don't think you should do it lightly.
I agree with Sarah. I think when you're doing a movie, you've got to remember that you're in showbiz. This is showbiz. And these poor people have paid to go and see this movie. And you really want to give them a good time, and they've got to sit there, as you say, for an hour and a half, and they really want to have a nice time. With a novel, I was thinking about Mr. Biswas, which we were talking about yesterday. I thought Mr. Biswas would make a terrible film, but because it's a great novel, but there's lots and lots of very close detail. You couldn't show that in a movie. People would die with boredom. In a novel, it works wonderfully. In a movie, it's a completely different form, and the audience would demand something much more dramatic. So you can't, I think as Paul said earlier, you can't translate one into another. That's a ridiculous idea. They are different forms, and they work in different ways with an audience. Mostly when you watch a movie, you watch it with a load of other people, and you respond to their laughter and you respond to their response. Mostly when people read novels, they're alone, and it takes a much longer time. It's a completely different thing.
That's true. But I think Hanif is right. A House for Mr. Biswas would make a terrible film, but might make a brilliant 13-part TV series. Right. That television has allowed the narrative to unfold over a long period of time, over hours. So a 2-hour film of Mr. Biswas would be terrible. But 14 hours or 20 hours?
You can't say fairer than that for entertainment.
Huh?
You can't say fairer than that for entertainment.
No, but it would be, I think it might be a brilliant, very long, multi-part TV series where you'd see Biswas as a child and you'd move through it. But wait, what's going to happen next? And 2 hours every week, whatever it is. That's a type of entertainment or filming that's only been possible. I mean, since I guess the Glittering Prizes was on TV. Frederick Raphael. As a book, he eventually turned it into a book. It was a boring book, but as a TV series, it was actually excellent. Trollope, was it the Trollope TV series? I don't even remember who did it, but it was the Palliser books. I think it's 4 books by Anthony Trollope. Multi-part, I don't remember how it was, but it worked as an adaptation over hours and hours and hours. It worked.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? I think we could probably all think of TV series that that have been rather wonderful in a way that film, you know, that film adaptations aren't. I'm thinking of Fortunes of War, for example, you know, that was based on the wonderful Olivia Manning books, or Brideshead Revisited, for that matter, the original Brideshead, which, you know, I watched again recently, and it's really very good. And it's interesting that TV now, we were saying earlier, you know, we wish the screen would commission more original stuff rather than relying on adaptations. But it's interesting that TV is doing just that, isn't it? And that some of the best stuff on TV now, some of the American series like The Wire or Breaking Bad, Sopranos, you know, they were all commissioned for the medium, making the most of the medium, yeah.
Fantastic.
Right. Sarah, you've also said that good TV can teach you a lot about storytelling. So having seen your books adapted for TV, have you taken some of that back for your other books?
I think only what I was saying before, really, about structure. I remember, for example, in Tipping the Velvet, Andrew Davis, the British scriptwriter, adapted it, and it's in the early part, two young women are falling in love, and one of them is a bit unhappy about it. And there's a scene where before they first kiss, and it's rather charged and everything, and Andrew had her say to the other one, "I hate the way you make me feel," and it was such a brilliant line, you know. It was, and I really wish I could claim I had written it, and he'd just taken it from the text, but he hadn't. He'd written it himself, but it totally got the charge of that moment. So it did make me try in future and search for those lines that really nail a scene or nail a moment, I suppose.
Hanif, you've received some flack for mining your life, for mining people in your books. Do you think it makes people more upset to see, when those stories are translated for the screen, to actually see negative versions of themselves that they don't like in the visual form? Does it irritate people more?
Well, people are really pleased to be in my books. They should be so lucky, actually. They always have a good time. They always have a lot of sex. Why would you not want to be in one of my books? I can't see that there will be any reason to complain.
I remember hearing you say once, actually, it's always stuck in my mind. I remember hearing you speak, and this came up about whether you'd sort of put real life people in your books, and you said you could do anything you wanted with somebody, so long as you said they were sexy, and people forgave you anything if you made them sexy in your novels. I think it must be true, isn't it?
Put them in a film and get them to be played by Daniel Day-Lewis. What's not to like about that?
So I think the casting is important then.
Exactly.
Christos, you might have something to add about having more freedom in prose than in the visual medium. You had some trouble with one of your adaptations, and they censored quite a bit of it.
Look, in a sense, the adaptation that what makes a successful adaptation, what makes a successful film, that's, we can argue about successful, what is a good film, what is a great film, what is a good film, good book, what is a great book. I think the work that wasn't successful, I think everything that's been adapted has been successful in some way because of some of the relationships that have emerged from that process. It was when a work was offered, a director said they wanted to do a work. I said that there is this one moment, it was just one moment that it was a collaborative play actually. The one moment really quickly was an Aboriginal Australian man hires a white prostitute and abuses her. It was an incredibly difficult scene to write, to get to work with actors who, and we just said, this is the one moment. I'd written the scene that we want to be in the film. Will you promise that? And promise that, and then do whatever you like, actually. Write out characters, change something, but that's the one guarantee we want, which was promised, and then the film came. She said the money people will not have this scene in the film, and it got cut. And I think it was that moment where I realised that there's a freedom I have in prose that I wouldn't have, as a filmmaker. I think that's what I realised, that you can, yes, and I don't know if I'd be prepared for that life as a filmmaker. All those arguments every step of the way when I think about my friends who are filmmakers in terms of trying to justify their imagination,
So this question is for any one of you that wants to answer it. What would you feel about another novelist adapting your book for screen? Nick Hornby recently, he wrote the screenplay for Cheryl Strayed's memoir, which became Wild. Nick Hornby translated Cheryl Strayed's memoir, Wild, which is sort of the big Oscar buzz for Feb. What would you feel about giving your book to another novelist for them to adapt it?
It would be a great relief to have somebody else doing it rather than have to go to the trouble of doing it yourself. And I think, as Paul says, it's probably a better idea for somebody else to do it, because there's all kinds of stuff in the book that you think you'd really love. And it's always those bits that you have to take out. You know, like when you edit a book, it's always the best lines that the editor wants to take out, and it really breaks your heart. But it's always wise to take that stuff out. So it's a good idea. Sarah was incredibly lucky to have Andrew Davis do one of her books, because he's a top man. He's really good at what he's doing. So if you're wise, you just hand it over to them and let them do their work. They're very, very good at what they're doing. What's to complain about?
I think I'd like to say that when you're writing, I don't know, you mentioned an editor wanting to take out lines. One of the pleasures of writing a novel, one of the pleasures in my life, is that no one ever told me, I mean, they might have said, they might have made a suggestion to me about the book, but I've never changed anything that I wanted to keep in a book. If someone says, in fact, I remember I wrote a book and a man said, it takes a while to get started, why don't you leave out a chapter, an early chapter? I said, which chapter? What are you talking about? And he said, oh, well, I was just making a suggestion. So this idea of someone telling you how to write a novel doesn't happen in the novel writing business, at least.
But that would have been a really good idea, Paul. It's a really good idea to take the first chapter out. It's always a good idea. You should have listened to
I should have listened to him. But
I wrote a script the other day. It was 90 pages. The director said to me, if we drop the first 60 pages, then it really starts working. And I thought, I think I'm going to kill you at this moment. And then I went home and I took out the first 60 pages and I started on page 60, and the whole thing was much better. So sometimes other people have much better ideas than you do.
They may have better ideas. No, they may have
wise to listen to.
They may have better ideas if you're writing a script, but if you're when you're writing a novel, you're living with the novel over a period of years often, and it's your book. But a script seems to belong to a lot of other people, including the director. I don't want to be told how to write. If someone says, you write a script and someone says, well, we like this, but change that. No one has ever successfully gotten me to change anything in any book that I've published.
But that's a terrible weakness, Paul.
It's one of the pleasures of being a writer. I disagree with Hanif in this. One of the pleasures of being a writer is you're a free person. You are free to do whatever you want. When you're writing a script, this has nothing to do with adaptation. When you're writing a script, you're not free to do what you want. It becomes a collaboration. You sit around, very social, have a cup of tea, let's discuss the script. But I've never had this with a travel book or a novel or a short story. Sometimes in a short story, they might say a punctuation, or I don't know, maybe a couple of words out. If it's the New Yorker, they're fastidious. So on a point of taste, they might change something. But in general, a script is written not by one person. It's actually, there's suggestions by a lot of people. A novel is written by one person and it stands or falls.
And most novels are really badly edited, actually. Novels are not edited well enough, in my view. A movie will really go through a very hardcore process of editing. From the moment you write the script to working with the director, then the producers will come in, and then the actors will start saying, fucking hell, I'm not saying that, they wouldn't say that. And then you work with the editor, and then Harvey Weinstein recuts it in his bedroom at home. And it seems to me that this process is nothing but good, actually. And it seems to me that most novels are overwritten, they're far too long, and they're badly edited. And they could be half the length, and they'll be twice as good.
That may be true of most novels, but not my novels.
Okay, on that note, I think that's all the time we have. We're going to open it up to the audience for questions. Who's going? There's a question there. Here, here.
Hi, I have a quick question for Mr. Kureishi. Did you like the adaptation of your story's intimacy?
Well, I didn't really, no. The director's dead now, and he was a good friend of mine, and I would never have said this when I was alive. I wasn't crazy about it. I did say to him at one point, I didn't write the script. I did say to him at one point, if I'd written this, I would have put at least one joke in. And the stuff I write, I like to think is comic. And he made a very heavy, very serious novel about people having sex. I can't think of anything funnier as a subject. So I wasn't crazy about that. I wasn't crazy about that film, but I handed it over to him, and as everybody says here, you hand it over, and then you can't complain later on about the fact they fucked it up. You have to hand it over and take the consequences and spend the money and enjoy it. Yeah.
Good evening to all of you. My question is open to each one of you. Do you think as a screenplay writer, it is more beneficial directing a movie based on your script, like Woody Allen and Richard Linklater do, instead of letting someone else do it who is, so to speak, more experienced? Or is it not?
Interesting. Have any of you thought of directing? Hanif, you've directed.
I'm not a director. If you are a director and you know how to direct, then you can direct movies. Woody Allen kind of knows how to direct, so he can do them. He's not a novelist. It's very hard to be a novelist, a screenwriter, and a film director. I can't think of anybody who's ever been able to do that. That's impossible. And there are very, very few people who can direct and write as well as, you know, the only person who can do that is probably Bergman. Everybody else, you need a writer and you need a director. There are very few people who can direct and write at the same level. As I say, I think Bergman can probably do that and is really a proper writer. But the two directors, the two people you mentioned, Woody Allen and Richard Linklater, are both pretty good directors and pretty good writers. But I would have to say that's very, very unusual. Most directors need writers. And directors hate the fact that they need writers. They hate the fact they need you. They can't do anything without you, actually. They really hate you, that they depend on you. But we must remember that everything we see on television, everything we see in the movies has been written by somebody. You know, it usually says a film by so-and-so. But it's not a film by so-and-so. It's usually a film written by somebody else and directed by somebody. And as Paul says, it's mostly a collaboration. It's like being in a band. It's much more like doing jazz, actually, than writing a novel. And they are completely different processes. But I would say that mostly in television and usually in the cinema, the writer is really neglected and forgotten. And I think that's a real shame.
I think that's true. I was going to say that some of the most successful or happiest experiences in film are with a great director who has a writer that he or she has worked with over the years. I'm thinking of Jean-Claude Carrier and Buñuel. You know, Buñuel and Carrier. They worked together, and you could see them having a drink together, working it out, and Buñuel saying, what if we do this? And Jean-Claude Carrier saying, okay, I'll do that. And they meet the next day. It's just two people, the director and the writer, working together. There must be other examples of that. But when I see a Buñuel film, I always think, this is two guys. And that's why this film is so good.
Yeah, absolutely. But Fellini, for instance, took all the credit for those films. He didn't write those films. Fellini's a genius, but he didn't write those movies. And when Fellini traveled with the writer would always go economy. Fellini would sit at the front.
There's one right at the back there.
Yeah. Hi. I just wanted to ask that for books written in the first person, you tend to see other characters from the point of view of the protagonist, how he views them. Their motivations are kind of filtered through his point of view. So I was wondering, in a movie adaptation of a first-person novel, Do you think that's something cinema could do for those other secondary characters, give them a life of their own apart from the protagonist?
Anyone?
I mean, I think actually to do the first person novel, to adapt that faithfully and have the resonance of the novel is a very, very difficult thing. Very, very difficult thing, because the voice, you know, that when Hanif was talking about, when I asked about, do you see it as a script or do you see it as a book, and you said words is book. For me, it's voice is book, and so how do you translate that into a film and be consistent to that novel, I think is a very hard thing. But what fascinates me is that if you can then choose a character, that was what I was trying to explain with my fascination with the Forster book, is to choose a character that may not be the pivotal character in the book, may not be even the first person point of view. Then I think you can make something fascinating. I think that's a way you can enter you can communicate something about why you love the book, why you want to translate the book, why you want to adapt the book, without having to be burdened by the weight of what the book is.
Yeah. I think based on or inspired by is often more interesting, don't you, than an adaptation of. They use the text as a springboard for creating something of their own.
Yeah.
Great. That's all the time we have. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.